Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Today we're going to be looking at some excerpts from this book we found.
Yeah.
Originally in Spanish.
Right.
And basically it's looking at Marxism in the 21st century.
In the 21st century.
So it's focusing on these two thinkers, Althusser and Gramsci.
Right.
And whether or not basically their ideas can help us understand the modern world.
Yeah. That's really interesting because I think a lot of people see 20th century Marxism as sort of passé.
Right.
But there are
Outdated.
Yeah, there's a real resurgence of interest in Marx himself.
Yeah, it's like the Marxist comeback tour.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
But the book opens with a question.
Okay.
Does this whole like workers versus capitalists thing still make sense in our modern world?
Because it feels like
have things changed?
Yeah, like we have entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
We have the gig economy, knowledge workers.
The knowledge economy.
It's so much more complex than in Marx's time.
Exactly. And it's more nuanced.
Yeah.
But
well, that's what's so interesting about this book is that it kind of challenges us to ask ourselves, have things really changed that much?
That's a good question.
Are there still these underlying realities that haven't really budged?
I like that.
Since Marx's time.
Okay, so let's dive in here.
Yeah.
The book starts off by introducing us to this guy.
Okay.
Louis Althusser, who's a scholar.
Yeah.
Who wanted to approach Marx with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Like take away all the political baggage.
Yes.
All the interpretations.
All the predetermined political interpretations.
Yeah, he wanted to
he called it
rescue Marx from Marxism.
They're rescuing Marx from Marxism.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think he was really brilliant in recognizing that this ideology that had built up around Marx's work had often become conflated with Marx himself.
It's like people were taking his early writings and saying,
exactly.
Oh, well, look, he was wrong then, so he must be wrong now.
Precisely. And so Althusser really focused on distinguishing between what Marx had published formally and his other writings.
Okay.
And really thinking about
the evolution of his thought.
The evolution of Marx's thinking throughout his life.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So to get to the heart of Althusser's approach, the book dives into this fascinating debate that was happening among Russian communists in the late 19th century. And it basically revolved around the question of whether Russia, which was largely pre-feudal at that time.
Pre-capitalist.
Yeah. Absolutely had to go through a capitalist phase.
Did they have to follow a predetermined path?
Yeah. Achieving communism. So was there this preordained path?
Yeah. Choose your own adventure for communist revolutions.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So on the one hand, you had people who were
we have these
Orthodox Marxists.
Orthodox Marxists.
So no, Russia has to industrialize.
You absolutely have to industrialize. First, you have to create a proletariat.
Right. So this is based on
a working class.
Marx's laws of history.
Yes. Yes.
Following so-called laws of history.
Marx's supposed laws of history.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you have these other people who are
But then you have these other people who are saying,
well, wait a minute.
Hold on.
Maybe Russia can skip that step.
Maybe Russia can skip that step.
And they're pointing to Russia's existing
communal land ownership system
right.
as a potential foundation for a more egalitarian society.
It's interesting.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating debate.
Because it's
are we bound by these ironclad laws of history?
Be bound by these ironclad laws.
But there's just some space for agency.
Is there room
for
alternative paths?
Agency and alternative paths.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The book actually quotes Marx himself, weighing in on this debate.
Oh, wow.
And he actually rejects
Marx
the idea of a universal historical path.
A historical determinist.
Not at all. He actually criticizes those who are trying to apply his analysis of 19th century European capitalism as this grand universal theory.
Grand universal.
Applicable to all societies across all time.
Okay, so he's saying
he was very clear. Each historical situation needs to be studied individually.
Right.
And in comparison to others.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's more nuanced than just these.
Yeah. So Althusser's point is that Marx was dissecting
hard and fast laws.
The specific mechanics of capitalism.
Right.
He wasn't trying to lay down these unbreakable laws of history.
And this leads us to one of Althusser's big ideas.
Yeah.
Which is
structural causality.
Structural causality.
Which was influenced by structuralism.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you break down for us
structuralism? So structuralism is all about focusing on the underlying system and structures that shape our world.
Okay.
Rather than just looking at individual actions or events. Right. It's like understanding the grammar or the code that governs
the underlying the underlying logic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for example, imagine you're playing chess against a grandmaster.
Mm-hmm.
You might feel like you're making these clever moves,
right?
But they're already 5 steps ahead.
Because they can see the whole board.
Because they understand the underlying structure of the game.
Right.
The relationships between the pieces.
Yeah.
The strategic possibilities.
So they're playing on a different level.
Exactly. So they're seeing these patterns and possibilities
that I'm missing.
That you're completely missing.
Yeah.
Because you're only focused on the individual moves.
Right.
Right.
So to illustrate this idea of structural causality, the book uses a really great example from Marx himself about this British colonizer, Mr. Peel.
Mr. Peel,
who tried to basically recreate English capitalism in Australia.
In Australia,
So this guy, Mr. Peel, was meticulous. He brought capital.
He brought machines.
Machines.
He even brought workers all the way from England.
Wow.
But
his venture completely flopped.
No.
Yeah.
What happened?
He forgot to bring the structure of English capitalism.
He didn't get the structure.
Yeah.
He brought the pieces.
He had all the ingredients.
But not the underlying logic.
Yeah, but not the recipe.
That made them work together.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, in England, there was this ready supply of workers who were desperate for jobs.
Okay.
This wasn't just a coincidence.
Right.
It was a direct result of the fact that people had been driven from their land.
They had been
violently driven from their land and their traditional livelihoods.
That's right.
They had no choice.
They had no other
but to work for wages.
Options.
Yeah.
So he assumed.
So he just assumed that this natural law of supply and demand
would just magically appear?
Would just exist in Australia, but he forgot that law only worked because of this whole history of dispossession and inequality.
It's like he forgot the context.
Exactly. He forgot the context.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that you can't just transplant these economic systems without taking into account the historical
and social
context
that makes them function.
Yeah. It's like we often talk about economic development as this neutral, objective process.
Yeah.
But we forget about
but there's all these
hidden structures of power
and inequality.
That
are like baked into it.
Yeah, they're baked into these systems.
Right.
You're hitting on a crucial insight here.
Okay.
This brings us to a concept that Marx himself highlighted, expropriation.
Expropriation.
Which describes the often violent process of taking away people's
economics. It's about
the means of subsistence.
Oh, wow.
Their ability to support themselves independently.
Okay.
So the book gives this chilling example of burning the banana trees.
Oh, wow.
To force people into wage labor.
Wow.
By destroying their ability to provide for themselves.
So they had no choice but to...
and they're left with no choice but to...
Work
for meager wages.
Terrible wages.
This act of violence, often forgotten or deliberately obscured, is the foundation upon which capitalist freedom is often built.
We kind of take for granted the conditions that make our system possible.
Yeah, we assume it's just
we're like, it's
the natural order of things.
That's the natural order.
But there's a whole hidden history of violence and exploitation.
Like we don't think about where
our food comes from.
You're absolutely right. And this connects back to the idea of structural causalities.
Yeah.
Like Plato's theory of forms.
Yeah.
The unseen essences that make things what they are.
Yeah.
Just as you can't ride the idea of a horse.
Right.
You can't create capitalism.
You can't bake a cake.
With just its physical components.
They're just the ingredients you need.
You need the underlying structures, the social relations, the historical context, right? So structural causality is like...
this hidden code that dictates how the system operates, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
The system.
Exactly. And this leads us to Another one of Althusser's thought-provoking ideas.
Okay.
Anti-humanism.
Okay, anti-humanism.
Oh.
Sounds a little scary.
It's not as scary as it sounds.
Like
what
it?
Althusser argued was that this concept of man with a capital M didn't really have a place in Marxist theory.
So it's not like he's against humans.
No, it's not about devaluing human life or anything like that. Okay. It's more about recognizing that capitalism as a system often operates according to its own internal logic, which can be at odds with human well-being.
So like it has a...
So think about automation, for example. Yeah. We have all this incredible technology that could potentially free us from tedious labor. Yeah. But under capitalism, what happens?
We end up working more.
Often it leads to more work.
Right.
More precarity, greater concentration of wealth.
Right.
It's in the hands of a few.
The system has its own.
Right. It's like the system has a mind of its own.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have our best interest at heart.
Yeah.
It's as if capitalism...
So does that mean we're powerless to change it?
Has its own metabolism.
Okay.
Distinct from our human needs.
Okay.
And our relationship with nature.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Okay.
And one that will...
And one that we'll delve into further as we explore Althusser's ideas and this concept of structural violence.
Yeah, okay.
But before we go there, I want to introduce another thinker.
Bring it on.
Who builds on these ideas in really fascinating ways.
Okay.
Antonio Gramsci.
Gramsci, okay.
So Gramsci's work kind of shifts the focus from the economic base to these superstructures.
Okay.
Things like culture, ideology. Yeah.
And how they shape our understanding of the world.
Okay.
His concept of hegemony is particularly relevant today.
Hegemony, okay.
It explains how...
Break that down for us.
Ruling classes maintain power.
Okay.
Not just through force.
Okay.
But by making their interests...
So through ideas.
...seem like the common sense of society.
Common sense can be a tool of power.
It really can.
That's crazy.
Think about it. Have you ever heard a company threaten to move jobs overseas?
Yeah.
If regulations are tightened...
All the time.
They're appealing to this shared idea of economic necessity.
Yeah.
Even if it ultimately benefits them and harms workers.
So they're like manipulating our understanding.
What's good for the economy.
That's what I was getting at.
Wow.
Yeah, he argued that...
That's kind of scary.
Political struggle often involves what he called a war of position, a battle to control the language.
Waging war on...
the narratives and ultimately the very meaning of concepts that shape.
It's a battle for...
or look like perception.
Hearts and minds, not just territory.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So to illustrate this, think about the word patriotism.
Patriotism, yeah.
Different groups are constantly define it in ways that benefit their interests.
Right.
This war of position
that's so true.
is playing out all around us in the media, in our political discourse.
And in our daily lives.
And even in our everyday conversations.
Right. If our understanding of these concepts can be manipulated.
It makes you wonder.
How do we know?
Yeah, how can we know?
What's real?
What's real or true?
Or what's true,
That's the challenge. And that's why critical thinking is so important.
Right.
Gramsci's ideas give us the tools to decode these
power dynamics,
like the left.
And to see through this fog of ideology, challenging the right.
And what's really fascinating is that it's not just the left that's caught on to these ideas.
Oh, so both sides are using.
The right has also caught on to the power of Gramsci's insights.
Okay.
So think about the rise of think tanks, for example.
Think tanks, yeah.
They've played a huge role in shaping public discourse.
Right.
Often pushing agendas that benefit specific interests.
So they're masters of
the
war of position.
Of the war of position.
Wow.
Yeah.
So these ideas are
really powerful tools for understanding how power operates.
Yeah.
Regardless of
your political
stance. And it gets even more fascinating as we explore how they're being applied in real-world political movements.
All right, let's get into it.
But we'll dive into that in the next part of our deep dive. So before we jumped into Gramsci, we were talking about how Althusser wanted to strip away all those layers of interpretation and ideology that had built up around Marx.
Right. It's like, get back to the basics, folks.
Yeah.
What did Marx actually say?
Exactly. And to really illustrate this point, the book revisits that debate about the Russian mir, those communal village structures that were prevalent in Russia in the late 19th century.
Right. The big question was, could Russia use those existing communal structures as like a springboard to a more egalitarian society? Or did they absolutely have to go through like a capitalist phase first?
It's like choose your own adventure for communist revolutions.
Yeah, exactly.
And you had those who clung to a more orthodox interpretation of Marx, arguing that Russia had to follow the same path as capitalist Western Europe.
Right. They're like, no, you have to follow the one true path.
They believed in these ironclad laws of history.
His laws of history.
That dictated how societies must develop.
But then you have these other people who are like, wait a minute, maybe Russia can chart a different course.
Yeah, maybe Russia can skip that step.
One that builds on its own unique historical and social conditions.
Exactly.
They're challenging this idea that there's only one way to achieve social progress.
And what's so fascinating is that Marx himself actually weighed in on this debate.
Oh, wow. So Marx is not like a strict historical determinist.
Not at all. He actually pushed back against those who are trying to turn his analysis of capitalism into some kind of universal blueprint for all societies.
He's like, hey, I was analyzing a specific time and place. Don't go applying my ideas willy-nilly to every situation under the sun.
Exactly. He emphasized the importance of studying each society on its own terms and recognizing the possibility for different paths of development.
It's like context matters.
Context matters.
This makes me wonder, if Marx wasn't like a strict historical determinist, what did he see as the driving forces of social change?
That's a great question. Marx was deeply interested in understanding the contradictions and tensions inherent in capitalist systems. He saw these internal contradictions as the seeds of potential transformation.
So it's not just about external factors or some preordained historical path. It's about the internal dynamics of the system itself.
Precisely.
That create the conditions for change.
And this brings us back to Althusser's emphasis on structural causality.
Okay, structural causality.
He argued that to understand social change, we need to look beyond individual actions and events to the underlying structures and relations that shape them.
It's like that chess analogy again. If you're focused on individual moves, you're missing the bigger picture.
Exactly.
The underlying patterns and strategies that determine the outcome of the game.
And just as Mr. Peel failed to recreate English capitalism in Australia because he forgot the structure, those who tried to force Russia into a predetermined historical path
were missing the crucial role of context and social relations.
Right, they didn't account for the specific conditions on the ground.
This has major implications for how we understand history. It's not just a linear progression from one stage to the next, but a complex interplay of forces, structures, and human agency.
Absolutely.
And this structural understanding also sheds light on how power operates in society. It helps us to see beyond individual bad actors and to recognize the systemic forces that perpetuate injustice and inequality.
And this brings us to a concept that we touched on earlier, structural violence.
Right, structural violence. Can you remind us what that means?
Of course. Structural violence refers to the ways that systems and institutions can inflict harm and suffering, even in the absence of direct intentional acts of violence.
So it's not like someone's like punching you.
It's not about individual acts of aggression. It's about the ways that poverty, lack of access to health care, discrimination, and other forms of inequality are built into the very fabric of our society.
So it's like this invisible hand is pushing people down, limiting their opportunities, and denying them a fair chance at a good life.
Exactly. And what's so insidious about structural violence is that it's often invisible, normalized, and accepted as just the way things are.
Right. We just think that's
how the world is.
We tend to blame individuals
for them for
failing to recognize the systemic forces that are stacked against them.
This makes me think about the stark differences in health outcomes between different socioeconomic groups. It's not just about individual choices. People living in poverty often face a whole array of challenges: lack of access to healthy food, safe housing, quality health care that undermine their well-being.
You're absolutely right. And this is where a structural analysis becomes crucial. It helps us to see that these inequalities aren't just random occurrences or the result of personal failings.
Like it's like, oh, they're just lazy or they made bad choices.
Exactly. They're produced and reproduced by the systems and structures that shape our lives.
It's kind of a sobering thought.
It is a sobering thought.
It means that even if we're not actively participating in acts of violence or discrimination, we might still be complicit in systems that perpetuate harm. And this brings us to another chilling concept: The banality of evil.
The banality of evil.
This term was coined by Hannah Arendt, a political theorist,
right,
who wrote about the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a key figure in the Nazi regime.
Right. She was making the point that he wasn't some, like, monstrous fanatic.
Yeah.
But a rather ordinary bureaucrat.
Exactly.
Who just carried out these horrific acts.
Yeah.
Within a system.
That had normalized, yeah.
And her point was that we all have a responsibility to resist the temptation,
right,
to just go along with things, even when they seem normal or unavoidable.
It can just be like, oh, well, everyone else is doing it.
Exactly. We need to question the systems we're a part of, even if it means challenging authority or going against the grain. So we need to think critically about the world around us and be willing to challenge the status quo.
And this concept of the banality of evil has gained renewed relevance in recent years.
As we've seen the rise of authoritarianism.
And the erosion of democratic norms around the world.
It makes you think about all the seemingly ordinary people who participated in or turned a blind eye to atrocities throughout history.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that we're all capable of complicity in evil, especially when we fail to question the structures and systems that shape our actions.
And this leads us to a question that's been debated by theologians and ethicists for centuries. Can sin be embedded in social structures?
That's a big question.
Can we have structural sin?
Or are we talking about sin on a societal level, not just individual actions?
Yeah, so it's not just about like me lying or cheating or stealing, but about participating in systems that are inherently sinful.
Or unjust.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea is that even if we're not personally committing acts that we consider sinful, we might still be participating in systems that perpetuate sin and injustice.
This makes me think about the way that our economic system often prioritizes profit over people. It can lead to exploitation, environmental degradation, a widening gap between the rich and the poor.
Yes.
Are we all complicit in that, even if we're just trying to make a living? It's a challenging question, and it's one that Pope Francis has been wrestling with in recent years. He's spoken out about the structural terrorism of global capitalism.
Wow.
Arguing that its relentless pursuit of profit has devastating consequences for the poorest and most vulnerable members of society.
He's been called a Marxist for that.
He has.
But regardless of the label, his critique of capitalism seems to echo some of the core concerns of Marx himself.
Yes.
The idea that capitalism can create conditions of exploitation and inequality.
You're right. And this brings us back to the question we posed at the beginning of our deep dive. Is Marxism still relevant today?
It feels like the answer is a resounding yes. The ideas of Althusser and Gramsci about structure, ideology, power, and the potential for systemic change are more relevant than ever. But I'm still wondering, what does it all mean for us here and now in the 21st century? What can we actually do with these insights?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's exactly what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking about, like, Marxism in the 21st century.
Right.
And I'm thinking, okay, all these ideas about, like, structural causality, hegemony, the banality of evil.
Right.
It's all very interesting, but, like, what do we do with it?
Right. That's the key question.
What can we actually do?
It's all well and good to understand these concepts.
Right.
But if they don't lead to action, they're just interesting theories.
Right.
So this book we've been discussing doesn't offer any easy answers or like pre-packaged blueprints for revolution.
No revolution today.
But it does highlight a few crucial points, I think.
Okay, give me some action steps.
That can guide us.
Yeah.
First and foremost.
Yeah.
It emphasizes the importance of understanding those hidden structures we talked about.
Right.
The systems and forces that shape our lives.
Even if we're not aware of them.
Even if we're not consciously aware of them.
Okay, so it's like
that famous quote from The Matrix.
The Matrix?
There's a difference.
Okay.
Between knowing the path and walking the path.
So step 1, see the Matrix.
Yeah.
Step 2, what do we do?
Well, that's where Gramsci's ideas about hegemony come in.
Okay.
Remember, he argued that power isn't just about brute force. It's also about controlling the narrative.
Okay.
Shaping our perceptions of what's normal, what's acceptable, even what's desirable.
So it's like controlling how we think.
Exactly. Just like that example we talked about earlier, companies threatening to move jobs overseas if regulations are tightened.
Right. They're like manipulating us through.
They're playing on our fears.
Our fears.
Or anxieties about the economy.
Making it seem like what's good for them.
Making it seem like their interests are our interests.
Right.
So a crucial part of challenging power is challenging those dominant narratives.
So we need to
It's about exposing the ways that our understanding of concepts like freedom, progress, justice have been manipulated to serve the interests of the powerful.
To serve the powerful, not the people.
Exactly.
So we need to reclaim those concepts.
Reclaim those concepts.
Redefine them.
Redefine them.
To reflect our values.
In ways that reflect our values.
Okay.
And aspirations for a more just world.
So whose job is that to redefine those things?
Well, that's where...
Is it
the role of intellectuals?
Yeah.
Activists?
Okay.
Artists?
Social movements.
Okay.
Becomes crucial.
So they can kind of show us.
They can help to raise awareness.
Yeah.
Expose injustice. Articulate alternative visions for a more equitable and sustainable future.
We need to be able to imagine a different future.
Exactly.
If we want to create it.
It's a process of unlearning.
Okay.
And relearning.
Unlearning and relearning.
Breaking free.
From the mental chains.
I like that.
That keep us bound to the status quo.
And it's not just about me.
And it's not just about individual enlightenment.
It's about us.
It's about collective action.
Collective action.
It's about building solidarity.
Solidarity with others who share our vision.
I like it.
For a better world.
Okay, this is making me think about all the movements we've seen in recent years, like the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter,
the climate justice movement.
They've
all challenged dominant narratives, exposed systemic injustices, and mobilized people. To demand change.
They're showing us that it's possible to make a difference.
And the book actually highlights some other contemporary movements that are explicitly drawing on Marxist ideas.
Okay.
Groups like Podemos in Spain. Syriza in Greece.
I've heard of them.
They've been very successful at challenging.
The neoliberal consensus in Europe.
So what's their strategy?
Well, they've been very effective at tapping into widespread discontent with austerity measures, economic inequality, the erosion of democratic values. And they've managed to build,
These ideas are resonating.
With a new generation.
With a whole new generation of activists and thinkers who are grappling with the challenges of our time.
Climate change. Inequality.
Economic inequality.
The erosion of democracy.
Social injustice. The erosion of democracy.
So it's like this Marxist renaissance.
It's like a Marxist renaissance adapted to the realities of the 21st century.
Okay, so I get that it's relevant.
Yeah.
I understand that it's a powerful tool.
And this brings us, what's the ultimate goal? To a crucial point that this book emphasizes.
Okay.
The ultimate goal of a Marxist analysis isn't to create some perfect communist utopia.
Okay.
It's about creating a society that embodies the principles of republicanism.
Okay.
Where power is truly accountable to the people.
So power to the people.
Where the common good takes precedence over private profit.
And where everyone has the opportunity participate
in shaping their own destiny.
Okay, so it's really about rethinking how we organize society.
It's about rethinking how we organize society.
That's a tall order.
It is a tall order.
How do we even begin?
Well, the book doesn't offer any easy answers.
Right.
But it reminds us that we're not powerless by understanding the forces at play. By building solidarity with others who share our vision. And by engaging in the ongoing struggle.
So we have to fight for it.
For a better world.
We can't just sit back and expect it to happen.
Exactly.
We have to make it happen.
The people united will never be defeated.
Wow, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
It has been.
I feel like I have a new set of lenses to see the world through.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Remember, the most important thing is to keep learning.
Keep learning.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning.
And keep engaging with the world around you.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Marxism.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
It's been eye-opening.
Until next time.
We'll see you next time.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep fighting for a better world.